Morning, glory, and evening grace, America. Broadcasting tonight from Washington, D.C., from the studios at the Heritage Foundation, heritage.org, and I'll be here tomorrow night as well, checking in on the belly of the beast to find out what's going on in D.C., and there is no better place and to do it with than with Paul Ryan, Congressman extraordinaire from Wisconsin, chairman of the House Budget Committee. Congressman, welcome back. Good to be in your city, or at least you're home away from home.
It's not my city, but welcome to the Heritage Foundation. Great place.
It is a wonderful place. Congressman, first question. Everyone wants to know how goes the recall in Wisconsin, the stakes, and how you sense the lay of the land is right now.
We got 6 days to go. We feel good, but we don't want to get complacent. Turnout is the issue. They're not even running against these issues, the collective bargaining reforms. Tom Barrett, who's Scott Walker's opponent, isn't even saying what he would do to replace these things, how to balance the budget. They're just trying to destroy Scott Walker right now. And it's not working.
A lot of money flowed in from the unions, and then a lot of conservatives have rallied and continue to rally, and people can do so at HughHewitt.com. Does Scott Walker have the resources he needs?
Well, he's been doing well, but again, you got to see it through. What I always tell folks is we have to run through the tape. The polls, we got a new one that came up from Marquette University today that looks pretty good, but this is turnout. It's very difficult to predict the kind of turnout you get in an election like this because it's a very unusual election, and the unions are really good at turnout. They've got the money for it, and it does cost money to make the phone calls, to call folks and to get them to go vote. And so that does cost money, and that is what Scott needs for what we call our victory centers. We have them all over the state. And so it's really now going to the turnout efforts. What they're trying to do is basically destroy Scott personally to try and win that way. But I don't think it's working. It's so desperate, last end-of-the-minute kind of stuff they're throwing at him. And I think most voters are seeing through it in Wisconsin. I think they're realizing that, I kind of like the idea that public employees had to pay something for their health and retirement benefits. I like the idea that I can actually reform schools and we could get good teachers in our schools, and all these seniority rules, which made it impossible to get the right people in the classroom, are now, fixed. And I like the fact that my property taxes went down for the first time in 12 years. I like the fact that local government saved $1 billion in a year because of these reforms that simply ask that public sector employees pay something like what private sector employees do. And so the merits are there, the case is there, people like these reforms, and what's happening is the public employee unions are basically just trying to destroy Scott because if this sticks, meaning if Walker survives and the state senators survive, there's 4 state senators being recalled, then other states may try this reform. Go figure.
I think it's the second day at Gettysburg, and the third day will be in November, and I wonder if you can speculate on what the impact of these. I mean, your state's just been in chaos and convulsion, political division for 2 years. What's that do for the terrain come November in Wisconsin?
People are tired of this stuff. They're tired of the bongo drums and the kazoos and the screams and the sit-ins and the senators leaving the state for a month. All these sort of Chicago Alinsky tactics are just wearing thin with people. They've shipped in people from all out of state, to cause such a ruckus, to do all this civil disruption. And it just puts a bad taste in people's mouth, I think. And so, number one, they want to have – Wisconsinites want to decide the fate of Wisconsin, not all these outside, groups coming in. Number two, we think it's just natural that public employees pay something for these benefits. Number three, if Scott Walker survives this recall, and our state senators as well, which all told, they're telling me about $80 million has been spent against these reforms in our state. And this is not a real big state. In the last year, between the 2 recalls, if we survive this and these reforms stick, then our 10 electoral votes are clearly in play. Then that just shows us that Mitt Romney can take Wisconsin. And if Barack Obama cannot win Wisconsin and those 10 electoral votes, which every Democrat running for president counts on, then he can't win the presidency. So the way we see it is if he can't win Wisconsin, he can't get reelected as president. And so it's really sort of a proxy fight, not just on does government work for the people or vice versa, the consent of the governed, the founding principles at risk in our states. California made the wrong decisions. Look what's happening to your home state. Hopefully we can fix that in Wisconsin. But it's also a proxy on the fall fight, which is, Mitt Romney versus Barack Obama.
Now, Paul Ryan, I had a long conversation with your colleague John Campbell on Memorial Day, Monday. talking about the American economy, the chaos in Europe, and the linkage or the lack of transparency on the linkage. What do you think is the exposure? I'm switching to the global economy, and I'm going to walk it back to the budget and what you're doing with Jeb Bush this week. But what do you think is the exposure to the American economy to the problems in Europe, specifically Spain and Greece?
It's the same thing. They're just about a year or two ahead of us. It's the product of politicians making empty promises to voters that the government cannot keep. And if you don't fix these programs, these empty promises, they turn into broken promises. And so what's happening in Europe is they're in a debt crisis. The bond market's turned on them. They can't keep borrowing this unearned standard of living. And so they're cutting health and pension benefits to all retirees across the board, cranking up their taxes. Youth unemployment runs between 20 and 30% in those countries. And they're reneging on all the promises government made to retirees. That's what happens in a debt crisis. And every time they pass one of these reforms or these cuts, it works for 6 months, and they got to do another round of them, and their currency might implode. That is what will happen to us, meaning austerity, cuts to currency in years, tax increases, interest rate increases. All of that happens to us if we keep making these empty promises and have a debt crisis. Our current government, the president and the Senate, have chosen not to do anything about it. And that's a choice in and of itself, which is to stick with the status quo. And the status quo is we have a debt crisis in this country in the near future, much like Europe, which means government reneges on its promise to its current seniors, and its economy slows down, and the youth don't have the kind of future that we've always given our youth in this country, which is a better standard of living than the one we had that our parents gave us.
You know, I read the New York Times on the flight today, and there's a story on India and the fact that their growth is slowed to 6 to 7%, and they're angry with it. It's slowed to 6. That's 3 times our growth, Congressman Paul Ryan. That we've made choices that we can unmake, and I guess that's what you and Jeb Bush are talking about at the House Budget Committee day after tomorrow.
Number one, I really think we still have a window of opportunity with a new president and a new Congress next year. Turn this around, just like Ronald Reagan replacing Jimmy Carter, and get our economy growing fast, get our debt under control, get our budget balanced, and dodge the bullet of a European debt crisis. But the next president will decide this. What Jeb and I are talking about is crony capitalism. With this kind of big government philosophy that the president has put in place in Washington, the government is in the business of picking winners and losers. The government decides which companies specifically, which industries it wants to favor and which ones it wants to penalize. And that means you have to go hat in hand to Washington if you want to get dispensation, if you want to get favoritism. And so the powerful, the connected, the special interests, the people with political muscle and connections, they're the ones who get the rules written for them. The entrepreneur, the citizen, the small business, they're on the outside looking in. So it's big government with big business joining in a common cause to erect the barriers and rig the rules so that they can govern society for the rest of us, more or less. It's this cronyism and this crony capitalism that, yes, Republicans have been complicit with in the past, and we should acknowledge that. But Democrats, in particular the president, have taken it to a whole new level. And that's what you get with this version of progressivism that we're seeing from Barack Obama today.
That's going to be an interesting hearing on Friday. Paul Ryan, thanks for joining us. Good luck up in Wisconsin next week. I'm hoping everyone will now go over to HughHewitt.com.